have agreed to be panelists to help us focus the town halls around different themes. And so today we have three people that I want to invite to come up and join me. Lori, Willa, and Jean. You come on down. And at UIC, where I work as the director of the Gender and Sexuality Center, we were really fortunate to have some funding support from the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement to help us bring these town halls together. And really the vision for it was to think about policy really broadly, big picture policy, but how does that impact real people's lives? What does that look like in the day-to-day? And specifically for us around female veterans, right, and women in the military. And so each week we've had different themes. We sit and we talk for a while, and then we go down to the rehearsal room 2 doors down, and we have soup together. So if you're feeling like you could use a little nourishment, we'll continue the conversation down there over soup. As I said, each week has had different themes. We've talked about the new GI Bill and student veterans going back to school in very large numbers these days, right? We've talked about family sustainability. What does that mean for veterans who do multiple deployments or even deploying once to stay in touch and stay connected with families back home? We talked about regulation uniforms and hair, which was very deep. That was a big week. We really got into it. And last week we talked about military sexual assault and jurisdiction and accountability, which is all over the media and really hotly debated right now. Today, for a final town hall, we're going to be looking at the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and what are the implications a little ways out. Which brings me to this amazing panel. I'm really excited to sit with the three of you, and I want to introduce you. I have some bios, and then kind of open up the conversation for us to dive right in. Sound good? Sure. Okay, excellent.
After you introduce the folks, will you specifically define Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm recording. I'm recording us because I'm into documentation. They've all agreed to this. Okay, first we're going to start with our panelist in the middle, Lorry Lusceri. Lori is a registered dietitian at the Edward Hines Jr. Veterans Administration Hospital in the Chicago area. Lori's current position is Health Promotion Disease Prevention Program Manager. She's the co-manager of 2 committees that work on LGBT issues impacting veterans and VA staff. She received her undergraduate degree from Washington University in St. Louis and her MPH from the University of Michigan School of Public Health. Right here to my left is Willa Taylor, who is the Goodman Theater's Director of Education and Community Engagement. Willa began her career in arts education at Arena Stage, where she established the Alan Lee Hughes Fellows Program, one of the first theater-run apprenticeships designed to increase participation by people of color in professional theater. She then went on to Lincoln Center Theater, where she created the Urban Ensemble, a multidisciplinary project that served at-risk youth, which was cited by President Clinton's Council on the Arts and Humanities in the 1996 report, Coming Up Taller. In addition to a longtime career in the arts, Willa served as a Russian and Arabic linguist in the U.S. Navy. And while overseas, she oversaw productions for the USO in Greece and managed Armed Forces Radio and Television in Turkey, where she created the Profiles in Black History series. And on the end, she does have a fan club here today. And on the end is Jean Albright. Jean was an editor, reporter, and photographer during a 20-year Air Force enlisted career. In her last 2 assignments, she was chief of the Bitburg, Germany Bureau of the military newspaper Stars and Stripes Europe, and a spokesman for the Joint Service Military Entrance Processing Command, headquartered at Great Lakes Naval Base north of Chicago. Following retirement from the military, Jean became program manager for the Newspaper Management Center, a joint project of the Medill School of Journalism and the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University. She has been with Windy City Times, Chicago's only weekly LGBT newspaper since 1994, and is now director of new media in charge of website and circulation. Jean served for 6 years on the board of directors of the Service Members Legal Defense Network, which worked to overturn the military's anti-gay Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And Jean is also an active member of the Chicago chapter of the American Veterans for Equal Rights, the national LGBT veterans organization. She met her partner, Tracy Baim, 2 years after retiring from the Air Force. So welcome to you three. Thank you so much. It's really an honor. Thanks for agreeing to talk. So we were asked already for a definition of don't ask, don't tell. To tease that out. This was a policy that was signed into law by Bill Clinton as president in 1993. And the bill was theoretically intended to lift a ban on gay and lesbian people serving in the military that had been in place, that was instituted during World War II. It was a compromise, right? He went into office saying he would lift that ban, and then the result of very hot and heavy debates resulted in this policy that I think nobody felt really good about. The policy stayed in place until President Obama signed a repeal in 2011. The policy stipulated don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue, don't harass, and then kind of became shortened as don't ask, don't tell. Just going to throw in a couple of facts and then kind of open this up. But at the 15-year anniversary of this policy, which was in 2008, surveys estimated that over 12,000 officers had been discharged for refusing to hide their sexual orientation during service. There was a study just prior to the repeal that predicted that lifting the ban would not negatively impact military readiness, which was sort of the proof needed to sign the repeal into law. And I guess, Jean, I want to start with you by asking you to kind of take us into the movement that led to that repeal, and through your service work with various organizations. Can you talk to us a little bit about the campaigning and the efforts involved and some of the stakes involved in that movement?
It was never going to be realistic, even though people were ready to give it a chance. Any improvement would have been good. But military is a fishbowl community, and don't ask your supervisors are supposed to care about young troops away from home, so of course they ask, how was your weekend? Which puts the young troop in the position of having to lie, change pronouns. You just can't say what you did. Don't ask, don't tell. People were harassed, and to report, to get any kind of help, that was seen as telling. Don't pursue, commanders and supervisors were not supposed to initiate investigations, but if someone comes forward and says they're being harassed, that's telling, that starts an investigation. And harassment skyrocketed under the policy right away because there were people then documenting it, and because young kids away from home for the first time, they can read between the lines, and they know this policy said that these people shouldn't be here, and therefore it's okay to harass or beat them up. Lesbian baiting was referred to in the performance, and that's always been a handy tool. Young men, any men are going to be, young men trying to prove their own strength, masculinity. They want to be in certain jobs. They're going to be put off by a woman with a strong voice or a good handshake. And so when they will go out of their way then to ask her out, and if her response isn't what they expect, what they want, that's a threat to any woman, lesbian or not. So public opinion was ready, for one thing. The people working to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell were good at sorting out the message. One message was the right to serve. So few people are, such a small percent of the population are actually qualified to serve. No crime, education, health. So they were able to say this is for readiness. This is something we want to do for readiness. So public opinion was there. When general officers came out and said this would not hurt readiness, that was important. When general officers came out, there were several general officers who, once they were retired, told their life stories, and that helped so many other people get on board.
So it really took that combination of individuals stepping forward and telling their stories, and also social, just cultural climate shifting a little bit to be able to push it.
And when I was in, I felt like nobody cared about this situation. And then there were watchdog organizations. When Barry Winchell was murdered in his bunk, it's not obvious that that's going to be seen as an example of what Don't Ask, Don't Tell is listening to, but these watchdogs brought it to light.
Yeah, fantastic. And we have one storyteller in the play who kind of takes us really intimately and personally into how this policy certainly impacted her experiences in service, right? Willa, what was your thinking about that when you were watching today, and based on your own experience serving, and then also hearing that story? I know you do a lot around performance and catalyzing dialogue, and how does that story kind of tell the bigger story, or what was your kind of thinking about that when you were?
Well, I thought it was beautifully told, and I thought the whole performance was incredible. There were moments when I've been out of the military a long time, and but there were moments when it felt just like being back in basic training.
We've been hearing that.
Yeah.
The cadences come
Yes,
back.
absolutely,
And,
absolutely. And
yeah.
somebody screaming at me about storing my gear, especially. So I was in the Navy before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, at a time when there was this policy and were witch hunts, frankly. I can remember while I was stationed overseas on one tour when they called probably 15 or 16 of us in to interrogate us about being gay. Part of what was so touching to me and really brought me right back to that time was that sense of having to hide, and this idea of changing pronouns and using they constantly, never being able to have a picture out, always being careful about who was around when you had your... I was stationed several times on isolated tours of duty where you'd get like a 15-minute phone call, maybe once a month, and always being careful about who was in a booth by me, depending on who I was talking about. Thinking, because I was... had a security clearance, high security clearance, and was in intelligence, always having to remind people about what they put in the mail to me and what they could say in a letter, and just feeling completely unable to be who I was. Now, I knew when I went in the Navy that would be the case. I just don't think that I really realized how isolating and lonely it would be to be that way.
Yeah. So there was a lot that really resonated around
Oh
that.
boy, yeah.
Literally hiding.
Right,
in the locker.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And trying to find, there have been gay people in the military forever. So, and certainly as a lesbian, the way you found each other was to look for the softball team, mostly. so you would always try to go to the sports events. But no, it's the same thing. Yeah, I go to Looking Glass, I look for the softball team. So you tried to find people, you would try to find people, but even within that, the kind of care that you had to take about sort of gathering several of you together, or always being seen with certain people was enormously stressful.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting because when the year out anniversary, the year since the repeal happened, and all these studies were done and reports came out, and they said, oh, it's having no impact whatsoever that the policy has been repealed. No, we're reporting no impact whatsoever. Interesting. Laura, I want to bring you into this and hear from you in the perspective of the VA and the work that you've been doing. What have you seen change over time, or what are some of the impacts that you've been experiencing working with veterans?
Sure. So I've worked at the VA for 7 years, and I am not military. I'm not a veteran. So for me personally, I would want to say thank you for doing things like this, because this is, for me, the most clear way of experiencing things, learning in a way that isn't invasive, I guess, in a way, with a personal story of a veteran. And so as an educator at Hines, what I do a lot is use video, use stories that are told basically on a video that I can carry around and educate people and say, this is what it's like for LGBT military veterans and things like that. So, so first saying that, thank you. In the past 4 years is really when I have been doing the LGBT work, and it's really ramped up a lot in the sense of a national, driven policy as far as a transgender healthcare directive, things like that. I think the most scary thing to me and the most problematic thing for me is what folks have experienced as in the military frightens them from coming in the door. If I was treated the way that I was treated during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, do I feel like I'll have good health care at the VA? And so a huge issue that I face is trying to encourage people to come. And I've worked with Jean a lot on these things, and she knows how much I'm trying to get out there and say, come get your health care here, particularly for women. And it's a very different environment, but folks are still afraid to disclose their health or to their healthcare providers that they're LGBT because of, will it impact my benefits? Is it retroactive somehow? If I say it, if I discuss it with my doctor, is that going to be a problem? And that's a huge issue for me to ensure that we're providing good health care to people. So, I mean, I think we're seeing a change in the sense of more people coming in the door. One thing else about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell is that it still doesn't allow transgender folks to serve openly in the military. So that is a piece that is extra challenging, in particular in folks that are transitioning or have transitioned and getting health care at the VA. So it's quite a challenge. I do think that the climate is changing, but also understanding that working for the VA is working for a governmental military institution that in some ways, are living under ideas of 20, 30, 40 years ago. So it's a slow change, but it is happening.
I'm hearing a lot of agreement out in the ground, and I wonder if there are questions percolating out here. Anyone wants to ask, or comments that are, thoughts coming up for you?
I'm interested that you talked about serving before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I'm just interested in, was Don't Ask, Don't Tell an improvement over before? At least in some ways? Was it like part of, we were talking earlier about the dialectic, was it a necessary step in order to get to more openness?
What an interesting question.
I'm just wondering.
Before, in the time during the outright ban, it was also true that women were a new thing in the military.
Yeah.
So there weren't that many. They were referred to by their fellow soldiers as females, with an implication that they're very inconvenient and you can't count on them, and they're in the way, which is kind of demoralized from the beginning.
Sure.
It's hard to separate for me the experiences I had being a woman in the military and under the outright ban, and then Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
It's a really interesting question to think about, how the policy that was so flawed could have forced the ultimate undoing of the policy,
was
right?
It necessary
I think
step.
it's a really interesting strategic question of how does policy change really happen?
You could say it was incremental. It made the situation so outrageous that it
needed to change again.
There's a difference between a policy and then a law which had to be changed by Congress. And it also made the military, which is the biggest employer of young people in the nation, the only one that had to, by law, fire people who were gay and lesbian. And that's, you put that out to the public and change public opinion.
They had to fire them.
Yeah,
By
it
law.
was automatic. It was certainly before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was automatic if you were even the suspicion of being gay. There didn't have to actually be facts or proof.
That's right.
Just the suspicion of being gay. When I was in language school at DLI, and the entire class behind me was dismissed because of a party, frankly. So 17 people that they had just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to do clearances and to train in language school, they just kicked out. So you think the toilets are bad, the money that they spend on a toilet, but you get rid of all of these incredibly intelligent, you're losing a lot of resources. I think that I was lucky in a lot of ways because I was in a job, in a rating that was fairly specialized to begin with, being a linguist, and so the kinds of duty stations that I went to were also fairly specialized, and because there were not a lot of people who could replace me, so certainly our CO knew that we were gay. We had a softball team. We were the Kinsey Fives. We had that on our shirts. Most of you might be too young to even know the Kinsey scale, but the Kinsey scale was sort of this rating of where you are sort of between 1 being very heterosexual, 6 being very homosexual. We were the Fives. And we had our shirts. And the CO let us get away with that primarily because we were all in jobs that we're overseas. You could not just find somebody to take my place as a Russian linguist on the night watch. So in some ways I was very lucky.
All different protections.
Yeah.
Also, when they could document how many linguists had been kicked out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell
Yes.
before 9/11,
Yes.
which would have made a difference,
That's right. That's right.
and other special fields, when they could document that was also clear.
Right. That's right.
One of those critical moments. Yes.
Well, but I think just on top of what you're saying, that part of that too, in terms of your question, is that the ways information is disseminated now, and the ability to disseminate the information and to organize around it has also evolved tremendously in terms of how people could respond and find out about what's going on and be educated about what's going on and the impact of it and get that out there in order to create a movement around it.
Right. I also want to say, though, that there's also a lot of misinformation and to women here who had a different experience
I mean,
under.
I can't believe everything I read.
and then to know that, for civilians, not necessarily understanding what a dishonorable discharge means, that certain discharges are a felony. You can't get a job. And to the work that it takes to undo that. With the paperwork and the involvement of that is incredible. And the other thing that's so challenging regarding the LGBT piece is that is not documented. So we're working with a population of women veterans that is obviously quite small compared to the rest of the population of veterans. So we already have this little subset, but on top of it, if I say, we need to do more, training for LGBT health, and Lori, how many veterans are those? How many are there out there that is it 1 or is it 100,000? I don't know, and I can't tell anybody that. So that is, I think, extremely challenging. Until that changes, I think that is going to have a huge impact on how we're providing health care.
I have a question about what you're talking about, people not disclosing or being afraid to come into the VA at all for fear of being outed just because they have a yeast infection. What sort of, I guess, how much of that is actually happening? I guess you don't know who isn't coming in. But
Right.
what happens when somebody comes in and they are openly gay and Don't
Nothing.
say
It's wonderful.
Love it.
We love it. And it's something that I try to educate all of our patients in saying, tell us about your life. It helps us provide good health care to you. But it's also educating our providers on how to ask the questions, and asking everybody the questions, because it's not just that, I've had veterans tell me, Lori, my healthcare team is amazing, but that guy that sits next to me in the waiting room and taunts me, can you do something about him? Well, that's a little bit more challenging, right? And so to make it more normalized for the entire population is a huge undertaking. And I think there's so many things that have to happen before we're getting people to come in the door and welcomely and excitedly about the health care that they can get and to receive all the benefits that they deserve.
And I would just also say that it's very difficult for people to go for a psychological reason as opposed to a physical reason, especially when you understand as a vet sort of the backlog that is happening now, and veterans who, because of physical disabilities and because of physical injuries, need care. You think you can get away. Well, I don't want to add to the backlog, or I can make it another couple of days, or I can probably just, if I have another drink, I'll stop thinking about it. And it in the military, you're reared essentially not to ask. You're supposed to be self-sufficient. You do not sort of admit the kind of psychological damage, not just not being able to say who you fully are, but all of the system is set up to deny you. And what that means, regardless of whether there's a policy of don't ask, don't tell or not. That is not, it's not a caring and sharing kind of environment. And so to then have to come back and deal with all of the things that you have to deal with, sort of transitioning back to civilian life, plus this, can be very, very damaging and very difficult.
Also, Lori, I applaud tremendously the work you're doing. I think from having heard kind of from a social worker, from a national point of view, I think the thing is right that what you're doing is but it doesn't exist in all of the locations,
right?
Absolutely. Right, for the VAs and stuff. I think that would be my hope, is that what you're doing and what you're organizing, what you're advocating for, can spread, because it isn't right that other places where they walk in the door, they aren't getting the response when they disclose in terms of health care, into the way that it is, in your program.
Right.
So their health care can't be denied because of something, they come in, they disclose something, it's like, no, sorry, you can't.
No, I think that there's just a little bit of fear of that. Just in the LGBT population in general, can be fearful of health care in general. It's a very vulnerable situation that you're putting yourself in. You're going in to have surgery, and you don't want to hold your partner's hand, because what if the nurse that's taking care of me is anti-gay? And that's not a VA thing. That is a healthcare thing. And it's, if you think about the very sick and vulnerable, that's kind of the situation that it lies in, unfortunately. And then the mental health component, I think, is huge. And to add to what you said, if I had $1 for every time someone told me, well, I'm not that bad, I don't want to take it from the other person who needs it more. And it's not that we don't have the resources for everyone. It's that, help them first kind of thing. And I think that contributes to it as well. I think we have one other question here.
I just recently heard about the Million Veterans Program, and I haven't seen the questionnaire, but I was just wondering if on that questionnaire, because I heard it's a substantial program, are they asking anything about the LGBT community on that program?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Because I think if they did, here's a wonderful opportunity to find out about that community. And I didn't know if you knew anything about it.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't know the questions on it, unfortunately.
I don't either.
You're thinking about ways to get some numbers and some estimates and combat this reluctance.
Yeah.
It might take a while to get some actual numbers going, yeah?
So what about the issue of sexual harassment in general? Not necessarily, it may or may not be related to the LGBT? What about sexual harassment in general? Do you believe that's being dealt with effectively?
No. Oh, sorry. That wasn't directed to me. No, I don't.
So, do we use laws or what has to happen?
Well, the military is a microcosm of society as a whole.
Yes.
And the way that we treat women in this society, the misogyny, so think about Gamergate. So Gamergate is this difficult sort of, these men who believe that the domain of playing video games belongs exclusively in the male reign are harassing and threatening, especially with rape, but often with murder, women who are women who are journalists who happen to be covering video games, women who like to cosplay, women who are enthusiasts as they are of gaming. And it has gotten to the point where actually a couple of women have had to move because they felt so threatened. They've had to move out of their homes. Yes, these little, online. Yeah, so you can't sort of separate the military and the attitude around women from the military, from society as a whole. And until we figure out how to do something about the misogyny as a whole, you're not going to really be able to fix the military.
And I have to say, in each of these town halls, and I told you all the different themes we have been discussing, ultimately, this is where we end up. I'll be honest. Like, you're talking about sort of the roots in our culture around violence and misogyny, and it always kind of comes around to that. So I think you're bringing up a really important point that you want to respond to.
The difference in the military is that the women have to report it to their commanders and supervisors who have an investment in the guys in the unit and the reputation of the unit. And the numbers are 26,000 assaults. I think that's been in the headlines. 3,000 were reported, and so that number comes from surveys. The numbers that were reported were 3,000. The numbers that were legal action was taken were 300, and some of those were overturned because the commander has the right to do that. So in the future, and the thing we need to push for is the outside control of the entire process. So a woman knows she can report without stigma or threat.
But just follow up.
Follow up and then a final comment.
In society at large, it seems, recent actions of the Supreme Court and state legislatures and so on that gay, lesbian, etc. are having civil rights granted by state law and by federal decisions and so on. But at the same time, we're refusing to deal with the issue of sexual harassment. It just doesn't make sense.
Point taken. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
I just want to ask you a quick question. Two quick questions. Do you know much about Baron von Steuben, the man who helped George Washington get the troops together at Valley Forge?
An example of an early gay soldier.
Yes. And I didn't know that. And I've been to the von Steuben parades, and I've read about it, and it just happened that he had worked with Frederick the Great, and I said, anybody who works with Frederick the Great, I mean, he just didn't.
It's like playing softball.
Right. Then I found out that, Benjamin Franklin at first didn't want him because he was gay, but nobody else was willing to come and fight the British because everybody thought the Americans, so they got him, and he was out of a job for being gay, and so the U.S. Army had its first regulations and really was put its steel into it and became an effective fighting force because of a gay general.
Thanks for that historical grounding for us. That's excellent.
And now it's very difficult to find, and I just happened, and I majored in history, I just happened to read that. I don't know if you could do research on him and even find that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great point and probably a great segue for us to kind of to wrap it up, to think about the lineage of these questions that we bring up and the slow progress towards real change, And I just want to so appreciate the three of you for coming and sharing your views. Just a few things. This is our closing day. You know, we've got a show at 8 o'clock. It's been a fantastic run of this show. And we are intending to tour this production. We're already in talks with people around the region touring it. So if you have thoughts about that and want to continue talking with us, please, you know, sign our guest list, take our emails, stay in touch. And I want to just point out Tara Mallon, our artistic director and the director of this production. Iris Alvarado, who was a founder of this project. And our dear Yosha Thomas, who's slipped in the door there. Founder of One Savvy Veteran, who has also been a really core member of this team. So thank you so much for all being here. As I said before, we're going to have soup. It's 2 doors down, not in the pizza shop. Right beyond the pizza shop, we have some fantastic veggie soup. And the last thing I want to ask of you is you received these cards when you walked in. So this is something we've been doing since we opened the show. We started with an empty wall, and this is what has been collected since we started. This card is for you to write a message to female veterans and their families. And we want this to be whatever's come up for you, a thought, a wish, a question, a theme, a moment from the play, whatever it is that you want to pass on, we're collecting these. So take a moment, write your message, and then come down, please hang it on the wall wherever you're like, and we're going to pass that along. Thank you again for being here.